Hey, and welcome into episode 13 of A Level Deeper. My name is Chad Miles. Growing up in a relatively small suburban town, I had a couple of close friends who lived nearby, and from elementary school and onward, we were just about inseparable. Anyway, we followed a sort of traditional path through middle school and high school, and then one of those friends, who happens to be today's guest, Alan Largin, started to pursue a new interest in path, designing footwear and more specifically, basketball shoes.
I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. This is how I can bring my creative side of me with this like passion for sports.
I can vividly remember the day when all of a sudden I saw a picture of that same small town friend, Alan, at the Nike headquarters in Portland, Oregon. Not only that, but in that picture, he was posing with a shoe that he had designed for NBA superstar Carmelo Anthony. And I think that was the moment I realized that my small town friend from down the street was on a really unique path.
Every decision that kind of branched off from that, now I'm able to look back almost 15 years later and realize that like that might have been the most pivotal moment in my life.
That passion for footwear took Alan all over the country to design for brands like Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour before he had a unique opportunity to make a big transition and bring his talent and impact a little closer to home.
I was lucky enough, I had a family member that was working directly for Dan Gilbert outside of his office, and was just catching up with them. They were like, hey, like, you know, if you're not liking New York, would you ever think about coming back to Detroit? And I was just like, well, what footwear brand is in Detroit for me?
That conversation with local billionaire Dan Gilbert led to a meeting, and that meeting led to a new chapter for Alan.
So Dan was basically like, yeah, I don't know kind of what you exactly want to do, but I want you to come work for me. You know, so if you work with my chief of staff, like make a job description and a job title, then let's make it happen.
On the show today, Alan and I talk about the first time he ever received the feedback that his creative work wasn't good enough and the impact that had on him. We talk about the mindsets of being a creator and dive into things like whose opinions to value and how to evaluate the motivation behind our desire to create. Lastly, we talk about Alan's passion for the city of Detroit and the unique role he plays in bringing some incredible people, opportunities, and impact to the city. Okay, all of that and more is on the way next. Enjoy my conversation with my friend Alan Largin. As I was thinking about our conversation, I was thinking back to you and I at one of your birthday parties in second or third grade, probably playing some football in your yard or something like that. And I was just thinking about, you know, what do you think we would have thought at that time if we said, hey, in a good 15 years from now, you're going to be sitting down hosting a podcast together?
That's pretty wild to think about. More than 15 years. Like I was thinking about that too. Like we've known each other first or second grade. So, I mean, that's the majority of our life, right? Like 90% of our life, which is incredibly special. And I think that's something that you and I have talked about. I mean, not only for you and I to maintain a relationship that long, but then, you know, our friend Curtis, and that's just incredibly special. Like people, this term of chosen family is something I've talked quite a bit about. You know, you and Curtis, and there's so many other people in my life, or I definitely consider family. Yeah, I mean, I could fill the next hour talking about that, but it's incredibly special to me. Just, and I've realized it more and more just with things over the last year that have happened, how powerful chosen family is. And I'm just extremely thankful for that.
I want to go back to you sent me a message a few weeks ago, and not sure that I'm fishing for compliments, but more so you were talking about this concept of, I forget how it goes, but the seeing the tree and missing the forest, or it's the other way around or something about that. But take me back to that note that you had sent and that thought.
Yeah, there's this idea that I think we struggle as humans when we're around people so often, whether it's day to day or you've been around someone since first grade, that you don't see, you see the growth day to day and you see these moments day to day, but you're not able to see kind of these like dramatic changes that others might see, where, you know, like when you see a relative, and I'm sure it happened to you at your wedding, you had family come up to you that you hadn't seen maybe since your high school graduation or something like that. And they're like, oh, I remember where you were this big and, it's just so amazing what you've done, or so amazing, this night or whatever. And just so proud of you, because they haven't seen the constant, I would say, progression. But when you're best friends with someone, or you have a significant other, or you have a coworker, you're seeing that day in and day out. And a lot of the times you need to take a step back and kind of what was this person like? What was it like looking at this person 5 years ago? What was it like looking at this person 10 years ago? And you realize there's a lot of change. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I've been lucky more often than not that people in my life have had positive growth, positive change. And and you're not fishing for compliments at all. Like, I'm more than excited and happy to talk about this. But this idea that, I was listening to that podcast you had with Manny, and that's why, I felt compelled to let you know. I thought it was the best piece of content that you had ever put together, regardless of this podcast or anything. And just hearing you talk about scrubbing toilets in the morning and the evening, and I was talking to you day in and day out of that stuff. But then when I take a step back, hearing you say that and looking at where you're at now, and not even just from the toilets to now, but I would say just from like high school graduation to now, or Chad in 8th grade at the bus stop to now, that progression, that growth, that trajectory is pretty special. It's pretty amazing. And sometimes it takes kind of rehashing. And I think even personally, a lot of the time we struggle doing that. I mean, we see nobody more than ourselves, honestly, right? And sometimes when it takes certain disruptions or certain kind of moments for you to pick your head up a little bit and be like, wait, like, let's actually like take inventory on what's happened, what's changed. And more often than not, hopefully that's good change, that's growth, that's, something beautiful.
As you look back, like, as you reflect on your own journey, and I'm with you in that, it's like so often it can be difficult to take that pause and I think of gratitude. I think of just being grateful for the people in our lives, the things in our lives. I think about looking back at our own journeys. And so then I think about you and, what is your relationship with looking back on your journey and what you've accomplished at this point in your life? Is it something you think about often, something you reflect on often? Because the same thing applies, it's a two-way street. I look at your journey and I think it's incredible. I'm proud of you and I marvel at the things that you have accomplished. How do you see yourself?
Well, I appreciate that. And that means a lot coming from you. I don't know. It's something I've processed in therapy. Obviously I'm a huge advocate of going to therapy. Shout out to our guy, Mikel. I struggle being present. More often than not, I'm very forward facing. That doesn't bode well for me in terms of like being present in the moment, whether it's day to day or kind of wherever I'm at, or just kind of retrospectively looking at things. I'm just such a future oriented person, not in the sense of the grass being greener or being better than where I'm at. I'm just excited about what's next, trying to always think about what's next. That's just kind of and I'm lucky enough in my profession I'm given the opportunity to ideate on what's next, whether it's what could possibly be brought to Detroit or incubated in Detroit, or designing something new that currently doesn't exist. I can sometimes get trapped in that personally. So I've kind of struggled with that. And then, there's times where I turned 29 in September and I was like, shit, I'm really close to 30. 30, just societally, we turned that into a benchmark. And for me, it was kind of like, wait, like, what have I done? What do I want to continue to do? What haven't I done? It is kind of interesting too, when I look back and it's like, my internship at Adidas or Nike or Under Armour, like it'll be closer to 10 years in the next couple of years. And it's like, that feels like it was 2 or 3 years ago. And so now it really turns into more of a retrospective of like, how did that help me? What did I get out of that and everything? So I'm very vaguely answering your question. I think it is something though that I've acknowledged kind of with myself, of just because in my day to day with work, I'm very future oriented, working on what's next in a lot of my projects and basically all of my projects. That then personally, though, I don't need to operate that way. I need to be very present in the fact of like when I go home and I have my beautiful, amazing wife, I've got a dog that is constantly happy and excited to see me. I've got an amazing friend group that is more family than friend in most cases. I've got an amazing family, and just I need to be present. Just with some of those relationships, I mean, I'm not trying to sound morbid, but there's no guarantee that there's like a future oriented outlook with those people. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question there, but I think I'm trying to get better present, like in myself personally, trying to be present. And that's just something I've got to continue to work on.
So you mentioned a little bit about your work now, and I want to dive into that a little bit later. But I want to rewind and go back a little bit, because so for the full context, as Alan and I were talking about our friendship and relationship, he and I both grew up in the same small town in Michigan. We're both from the city of Brighton. We lived a quarter of a mile away from each other, and we spent a lot of time together growing up. And I think, we're just kind of come from similar families, and we're two kids just living the sort of suburban lifestyle growing up in Michigan. And I look back on the Future Soul contest as this moment for you where you became sort of like larger than this little kid growing up in Brighton. And it was kind of like, I don't think at that time in our lives, I'm not sure I could even fully grasp or appreciate what that meant or represented. But all of a sudden I'm seeing pictures of my friend who lives a quarter mile away, who I've grown up with Carmelo Anthony. And, it's just kind of this moment of like, oh, wow, I think he's doing something pretty big here, but maybe not fully grasping. Tell us that story from your perspective of the Future Soul contest and kind of the beginning of some of this journey.
Rewinding even a little bit more, you and I both played sports growing up, and you and I both with soccer and basketball, like when you're not practicing, you're talked into getting lessons and training and all of that. So sports, I feel like in Brighton, at least in our social circle, was very critical. What was interesting for me, though, was like none of the friends I played sports with were the friends that I was in art class with. I guess for just some context there, I've kind of come to this realization that it wasn't that I was necessarily always encouraged by my family to take art classes seriously or draw or anything like that. I just was never discouraged. I've realized more and more in life, it's not always seeking encouragement. It's just making sure or looking for discouragement, in the sense of like, if no one's telling you not to do something or that you're bad at something, like that almost is just as good as, or just as valuable as encouragement. But my dad is more artistically and creatively talented than I am, and always will be. And he's really got, some God-given abilities. So I always kind of saw somewhat him expressing that and utilizing that skill set. But yeah, I was living in these two social circles of taking my art classes seriously, and especially when I got into high school. But at the same time, I would eventually be on varsity basketball, and these two worlds that I just never saw coming together. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon, on a sneaker website called Soul Collector, this like Willy Wonka-esque competition experience called Nike Future Soul. Prior to that, I always, made sure that the shoes that I bought for the upcoming basketball season, no one else on the team had. So I wasn't satisfied going to Dick's Sporting Goods and just getting kind of like what everyone else, 8 of the other players on our 12-person team were going to wear. I was going to 12 Oaks Mall and Novi and going from Champs to Finish Line to Foot Locker 3 or 4 times. And my mom, unfortunately, would bear through that experience with me of taking 3 hours to pick out a pair of shoes. Like that's kind of how this whole thing started, and basketball fed into that. And then I started finding these websites where I could see what was going to come out in 2 to 3 months. And I stumbled upon the Future Soul competition, where I saw these 2 high school students get flown out to the Nike campus after they submitted a design. Their design won. They got 3D printed prototypes of their designs. They got to go to the Nike employee store where everything's half off and it's the size of a Dick's Sporting Goods. And they're walking around the Nike campus. And I was like, wait, like footwear design is a thing. Like besides even realizing that this competition was a thing, I was like, wait, people design these shoes. People get paid by Nike to design footwear. Like that is insane to me. The reason I say a Willy Wonka experience, like kind of just thought of Nike and Adidas and Reebok and Puma and Under Armour as these like amorphous kind of like hollowed grounds where there was a shoelace river and the shoes came off of trees, and didn't realize that there was a whole corporate structure to all of this, right? And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. This is how I can bring my creative side of me with this like passion for sports. Because I mean, at that time, in early high school, I knew I wasn't going to play college, let alone professionally. But it was this way of, wait, like there's a guy that designs the Kobe's that I'm wearing, and his name's Eric Avar, and he gets to sit down with Kobe and sketch shoes with Kobe. Like, oh my God. And there's a paycheck with that.
Yeah. Is that why shoes became this obsession of yours in the first place? Was because it was this mix of creativity in sports? Because where did that come from? Because again, to paint a picture, we're growing up in a very small town, suburban town. We're an hour from, the largest city. So it's not like sneaker culture was around. You mentioned your dad had an art background, but this wasn't really part of the culture that we grew up in. So where did this initial interest come from in the first place?
I have a tough time pinpointing it. I mean, I remember my fifth grade basketball tryout. Before it, my mom said, if you make the team, I'll make sure that like you get, because I remember showing up to tryouts and I had just like my everyday, I think I still wore basketball shoes to school, because you're at that age where, you're wearing clunky basketball shoes with jeans and everything. And my mom was like, I was like, Mom, I can't show up to tryouts in these like dusty, dirty shoes that I wear every day. But she was like, we'll go get whatever pair of shoes you want if you make the team. Threw that out there as a parent just to be like, let's cross that bridge when we get there. But I remember going to the mall, and I'd never really been in that setting before, seeing these like displays of Jordans and Nikes and everything. And I was like, oh my God. It was almost just like the shoes were presented in such a, I don't know why, there's something that struck me in that moment. It was like the way that they were presenting the athlete wearing them in the ads. And I don't know, the footwear just looked beautiful. And in the suburbs, like none of our stores had that, right? So I think that initial kind of shopping experience in fifth grade kind of ignited this interest. And I think as well, my skill set from a sports perspective wasn't that great. I mean, you played basketball with me in fifth, sixth, and seventh grade, and we spent a lot of time cheering our teammates on from the sidelines. But it was a way for me to maybe stand out individually a little bit. I clearly wasn't getting complimented on my stat line, but was like, oh, Alan, I love those shoes. And those are really cool. Where'd you get those? It was kind of a way to just subtly stand out. And then as we started to play these teams, because our travel team became pretty good, right? And you're playing teams from Ann Arbor like that were better than us. And those guys were wearing Jordans. And it was almost just like, wait, if we're wearing the team issued stuff, you almost associated the better players with the guys that were wearing Jordans and Dadas and that type of stuff. So yeah, I think that's where the initial obsession kind of kicked in. And then I think from there, I don't know why. And, I was just like, Mom, can I get another East Bay or Foot Locker gift card? All of my gifts started to shift towards that, to where now one pair during the season wasn't enough. So yeah, I think that's where that became special, specifically basketball footwear. And then when the competition came along, it just like totally took it to another level for me, where checking these like sneaker blogs became a daily obsession. When I got home from school, I would look for interviews with the various designers of the LeBrons and the Kevin Durant's and the Tracy McGrady's and Derrick Rose's and things like that. And I started to know those guys. So then I started to appreciate the product even more. And at that time, sneaker design was still super niche, let alone being a sneakerhead was still more niche. And I could message those guys on Facebook. These guys were like giants to me, still are to a certain extent. I guess kind of long story short, with that competition, I sketched my first shoe ever. It was a really crude pencil drawn concept for Dwayne Wade, and submitted it. And I ended up making the semifinals. It went to an online vote, and you and other friends and family helped market the hell out of that. And that kind of taught me this idea of also like your design can be great or your concept can be great, but how do you market and sell it in? That's just as important. Really making it relatable to people and kind of a shared experience, and ended up making the finals. The prompt then, which was like, it's this like kind of pinch me moment, was design a signature shoe for Carmelo Anthony. At that time, I mean, people now, Carmelo's retired, and he was a top 5 player in the NBA, had a signature deal with Jordan, and an idol of mine from a sports perspective, and had, 30 days to design the shoe. And then we went and presented at Nike, and very Willy Wonka-esque, like they flew a parent out with us. I mean, we were minors, like I was 15 years old, so the parent had to come. But I kept bumping into these people that went to this school called CCS, or the College for Creative Studies. And it was interesting because they were from Miami, but they decided to go to college in Detroit. And I was like, wait, like maybe I should go to art and design school. So by the end of my sophomore year, right, I knew exactly like what profession I wanted to do, where I wanted to go to college, and how to get there. And I had mentors with that. So, which is very, very, very unusual. And so, yeah, that competition, there's so many other branches of that. You know, my relationship with D. Wayne Edwards, who was running the competition. He's someone now that I've been lucky enough with the Gilbert family to bring him to Detroit now permanently. And that's maybe the most impactful thing I've ever worked on in my life. Like there's still this like ripple effect from that experience when I was 15, whether it's relationships, people still wanting to know about it, or just like I realized like every decision that kind of branched off from that. Now I'm able to look back almost 15 years later, and realize that like that might have been the most pivotal moment in my life.
So the thing that I'm curious about is that being such a pivotal moment, and being able to look back now and see all the things that came from that experience. I don't know if you mentioned it in your story, but the spoiler alert there is that Alan won the competition and his shoe went into production, and you could actually, I mean, our friends, you could go buy his shoe. It was sitting on a shelf in near our hometown, and you could purchase the shoe. You talked about how transformative that whole experience was for you. And I often think about this idea that I think we tend to limit ourselves, and we don't allow for all these transformative things or all of this web of things to happen because we don't actually give ourselves the opportunity in the first place. We don't believe that. We see this competition and we think, that's awesome. That's amazing that they could do that, but that's not me. Can you think back to that time in your life? What was your mindset around, what made you believe that you had an opportunity and you had a chance to do this and create all of what this has led to?
It's a great question. I mean, for that first initial submission, my dad sat with me in our dining room and, was showing me how to properly shade and things like that using his pencil kit, like his, he has like a tackle box, fish box of markers and charcoal and pencils and everything. And he pulled that out. And so there was very much like a father-son bonding moment there where it was never like, Alan, you have to do this. Like, what an opportunity. Like you need, but it was like, oh, that's cool that you want to do that. Like, it was kind of a way for us to bond as well. So I think that, played a large part in it. Just seeing the video recap of these kids that when they were interviewing them, I was like, these look like kids that I go to school with. Like, they're very similar to me. These two guys play high school basketball. Like, this makes all the sense in the world. And I kind of knew from, my friend group, you guys, that I kind of had this ability to draw in that way and kind of express myself visually. So it's kind of like marrying all of that together. And I think the way that Dwayne was kind of marketing the experience was very much like, we're looking for the next generation of footwear designers. And so it was very much like an open call. Nothing about it felt out of reach. I do think like what got very intimidating for me was then when it got to the semifinalists, 2 or 3 of the kids that I was competing against in the semifinals, when I just looked them up on Facebook, went to this incredible high school in Miami called Dash, Design and Architecture Senior High, where literally like in high school, they have like design majors, like car design and product design and architecture. So that became very like intimidating when I realized I was going up against this guy named Scott. And I was just like, wait, Scott is 10 times the kind of creative that I am, having then my parents there to kind of back me up. And everyone was so excited as well in my friend group and family. Once I made the semifinalists, you kind of felt like, oh, wait, if people help me get to this point, I can't give up. There was a funny moment where, I mean, it's funny now, but in that 30 days where I had to then design a new shoe for Carmelo, my mentor that was assigned to me from Nike. It was very cool. They paired you up with a mentor, Dennis Dekovich. I remember I had put all this effort and I was super excited into this design about halfway through. And he told me like, it's not good enough. You need to start over. I remember like specifically, it was like, this feels expected. I was like 15. I remember I woke up to that email, like having to check email at 15. I was devastated. I was just like, oh my God. I just remember like moping and like laying in bed. And my mom was just like, you still have like 15 days left. Like, what are you going to do about it? Then I like cranked for the next 15 days. And I think that experience at 15 very much like set the tone for my career, kind of the resiliency from sports kind of carrying over into having that competitive mindset, that perseverance in my career. I'm very actually thankful and happy. May sound convenient, but that I wasn't the kid getting a lot of playtime, or sports didn't necessarily always come easy to. If you just transfer that then to that experience within 15 days, like, okay, let's it's like running suicides, let's get after it. I think I can look back on it now and realize like that's where some of that came from. But I think at the time it's just like, okay, like, am I going to blow this opportunity, or am I going to, kind of rally and make the most of it? And I mean, it worked out, and I'm very, very thankful it worked out that way, because it was very cool for me. I proved something to Dennis at 15. And then later when I was 21 or 22 applying for a job at Adidas where he was a decision maker there, I already built, equity and proved something to him years ago that then helped me get the job with him at Adidas in New York.
I started this podcast for a very specific reason. I crave meaningful conversations and wanted to create an outlet to have more of them in my life. By recording discussions I was already having with friends and new conversations with new people, I guess I just wanted to bring deeper, more thoughtful conversations to a larger audience, because I think we all have an opportunity to grow from them. I gotta tell you, it makes me uncomfortable to do so, but I'm asking for your help. I'm imagining a show funded by the people who want to support deeper conversations. So for the cost of 2 coffees per month, you can help keep this show going, and as a thank you, get access to some exclusive behind-the-scenes content that isn't available anywhere else. In the episode description is a link to our Patreon where you can pledge your support and automatically get access to all the bonuses. So after the show, I'd love if you'd head there and check it out, and thank you in advance for your support. Okay, back to the episode. And I've got to imagine you proved something to yourself. I've got to think that you hadn't received feedback like that too many times in your life at 15 years old, of someone just saying, hey, what you've done and what you've created, it's not good enough, and go do better. And that's a pivotal moment. You either shy away from it and just say, you know what, I can't do this, I quit. And that's not the route that you chose to take. And I got to imagine that you proved something just to yourself, and that, hey, if I can face adversity and I can be challenged and I can still perform. I can still achieve what I set out to achieve in the first place.
It's interesting because, posting that first initial design online that got me into the semifinals and then the finals, that was on Facebook, kind of the start of social media in that sense. And everyone is telling you how amazing it is, right? This is great. You're so talented. What an opportunity. Remember Channel 7 or the station came over to interview me. Like, you're feeling like unbelievable because you think you're like the best at it. And then you get in front of an industry expert that's your mentor, and they say it's not good enough. Very much like a juxtaposition from everyone telling you that you're amazing, you're great. I think we're very much in a day and age now too, where because of social media, there's a lot of immediate gratification. Why a lot of us use social media. You post something and it's flame emojis, or I don't know if social media is necessarily always the best litmus test on whether something's great or not, or good or not. So I think it was great for me at 15 to kind of realize that there's a whole other actual legitimate and necessary kind of litmus test for whether or not something is good. And those are people in the industry that you're going to work with.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of my question that came up there, is like, where do you base, whose feedback do you value, and what is sort of your process for determining who you should listen to and who not to? Because I'm with you in that social media there's lots of pros and cons to it, but it might not be representative of I don't know, people pushing us to be our best selves at all time, best selves at all times. So how does that process work in your brain as far as whose feedback you're considering?
I mean, always, I just think from like whether or not I'm doing the right thing, that's friends and family. You could, I mean, we've seen it. People post a lot of dark things on social media, and there's people that affirm, prop up that negative behavior. Like you can, there's a corner of social media for kind of anyone and everyone. And I would say just from like a sense of like, am I doing the right thing? Am I making the right decision? To the beginning point of our conversation, I'm lucky enough to have people like you in my life, and my wife and my family, my coworkers here, just from a decision making standpoint. Now, from like a creative lens, I think I've been lucky enough to have some of the best designers ever as mentors. Dwayne Edwards, Dennis Dekovich, my close friends, Nick Diver designed for Yeezy and the first laceless basketball shoe. Jean Khalif is a phenomenal designer. The people that I get to work with today, more from a branding and creative standpoint, I'm surrounded by people that do amazing work, whether that's people that I, like I said, directly work with or used to work with. And that's the standard day in and day out. Like I don't need to go search for something. Like, hey, are we comfortable putting this out there? And that's kind of the litmus test. And I've been lucky, like everywhere I've gone, there's been a high bar for something to really make it from the wall to actually out there in real life. It's never, I don't think I've ever used social media as a litmus test for that. So I've just been really lucky to have peers day in and day out, kind of every stop of my career, that are people that I actually want to attain to from a actual technical ability perspective. And those are the people that I want to validate my work or tell me that it's not good. And I think like the interesting thing that people need to realize as well, and is that our shooting percentage as designers or batting average is horrible. If you were to realize just like the percentage of things that don't make it, the percentage of ideas that don't make it, it can be disheartening. But I think then if you realize that like Steph Curry is the best shooter of all time, and he doesn't even make half of his shots. As a designer, more often than not, like you're generating 10 ideas and maybe 3 get moved on to the next round. And then from those 3, only one's going to make it. So you're really in like that 30% range a lot of the time. And that's like if you're really good, like really, really good. Like I had an experience today where something that I submitted for a client just wasn't chosen. You initially want to look at them and like, they're not right. And you're just like, wait, like, no, I got to move on to the next ideation, the next phase, the next project.
Does that sort of reality of being a creator, the reality that perhaps 70-80% of what you create will never see the light of day, or will get rejected, or will get turned down, does that reality ever sort of get to you?
I'd be lying if it doesn't, right? Because at a certain point, when you're trying to, even when a client asks you for recommendations, sometimes you're in a great position, and 4 ideas that you submitted, the client loves all 4, and they're like, what's your recommendation? And it's almost like an impossible spot to be in. And then I think sometimes it's this balance of, you need to be passionate enough to really create meaningful work, in my opinion. But sometimes when you pour yourself into it so much, becomes very hard to emotionally detach yourself and realize that someone is critiquing the work. They're not critiquing you as a person. It's happened. Probably the most like public thing that I've worked on recently would be like the Cleveland Cavaliers rebrand, specifically the jerseys. And you spend 2.5 years just working on that. You're so excited for not only people in Cleveland, but all over the world, because the NBA is now global, to just love and drool over your design. And there were more comments on social that were not probably good for me to look at than were good for me to look at. And that's tough. But no one is sitting there saying like Alan Largin is a horrible human being, objectively saying like, which was, maybe there was some good feedback in there of, certain things that, we had a point of view on that we chose to go one way, but we got kind of a response in the other direction. And then I had some design friends say like, you people are critiquing how simple they are. You purposely tried to make them the most simple jersey in the NBA. And then also people are talking about your design. Just think about, they're taking time to talk about that. And you're in a position to kind of have that happen. And so I just think it's all perspective and having a healthy balance of people around you to kind of pick your head up, see the forest and not just the tree. But it's, it's tough because I think you need, like I said, to be passionate enough about what you work on. But when you're so passionate about something and it's not met with 100% Rotten Tomatoes review, if you will, it's tough not to think about that 7% that people that didn't like it, or 50%, or whatever it might be.
I guess it comes back to, why are you designing or creating in the first place? You mentioned somewhere in there the word choice, and I think the things that we are creating, inherently we're just making a series of choices, right? And hopefully we're doing them for the right reasons. Hopefully we're creating things that we have a belief in, and we believe in the process that we're taking to do so. And if to me, like what I'm hearing you say is that if all of those boxes are yes, I'm doing it for the right reasons, I'm creating something that I believe in, I feel good about the process, I feel good about all of these things, then we can't control the last step, which is how people receive what we've created. And that's not to mean that people's feedback isn't valid or that there's not an opportunity for us to learn. But it seems like as long as that whole process up to that point was something that was in alignment with your values and your beliefs, then there's always going to be that element that we can't control, which is what people perceive and what they think.
Yeah. And I remember it was my first semester of design school at CCS, and I was presenting an idea, for a design, and I kept saying I. So I did this because and I did this because and I did this because I. And my professor, Steve Schock, stopped me and said, Alan, design is a service. Art is self-expression. Basically, he was telling me there's a whole other part of campus here for the art majors that are non-design. And if you want to express yourself, like, that's the place to probably go do it. Now, I would say there's like a very limited few of designers that reach a point in their career where they're just paid for their expression. I think a lot of us strive for that, but it really helped kind of crystallize that for me, that design is not for me, it is for someone else. And so to think of design as a service, I think, to your point around those choices that come along throughout the process, it's constantly reminding yourself that I'm a part of this, but it's not just solely for me. In a lot of instances, it's not for me. And so I think that can help a lot of the time with those choices, because then you go and get feedback or you get a different perspective, and that helps you make that choice. Yeah, I think more and more I've realized in my career, I've tried to, in therapy, this is something that I've tried to unpack, is what's my motivation? Like, why do I feel so passionate about, because I'm not designing footwear anymore. I realized, less than a year out of design school, that even though I had done the Future Soul competition and 3 internships at the biggest footwear companies in the world, and then working at Adidas in Brooklyn, New York, designing for James Harden and working on some stuff for Damian Lillard and advanced concepts, that, wait, I don't want to do footwear anymore. I'm actually passionate about design and creating. And that led me to coming back to Detroit, which was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. But I've been trying to unpack, like, why am I passionate about creating? That's been helpful for me to kind of really dig in. And I think maybe there's still more for me to figure out, but and kind of what that why is.
You've mentioned passion, and especially coming back to Detroit. And Detroit is a city that you are extremely passionate about. Tell us a little bit more about why you say coming back to Detroit was the best decision that you've made, and some of your passion for this city and the many things that you're involved in here.
I'll try to be as quick with this as possible. I think it always puzzled me growing up in Brighton, living 45 minutes outside of Detroit, that people were more excited to go 4.5, 5 hours to Chicago. I was like, there's a big city, like, why? And I think we're all kind of aware, for the most part, globally, around kind of the rise and fall and now rise again of Detroit. But, when we were growing up, that rise wasn't happening yet. So there really wasn't kind of this like allure, but that always kind of puzzled me. to a certain extent. But Detroit as a brand, whether it was the sports or kind of the musicians coming out of the city, but still like this kind of tier one brand. So that was kind of just interesting to me. And, you and I had, some amazing experiences in our summers in high school, coming down to the city for a week each summer, and partnering with amazing organizations like Cass Community Social Services, and, helping impact people in a positive way, whether it was, soup kitchen work or cleaning up parks or helping recycle tires into doormats. Pretty impactful weeks though, because it got us down here, and it wasn't downtown. It was in the neighborhoods. And that's when Detroit really started to latch on from a gravitational pull to me. And so then going to school here for 4 years at CCS, the experiences I had here were amazing. But what would kill me was every summer for my internships, I went to Baltimore for Under Armour. I went to Portland for 6 months at Adidas. I went to Portland again for 3 months with Nike. Every single time I found myself like, oh, this city's amazing, but it doesn't have this that Detroit has, or it's not this. It's not a one-to-one. It's great. I could see myself here, but it's not Detroit. And then I moved to New York to work at Adidas, and what I thought was the most incredible opportunity to be at a design-only office in Brooklyn, working on, like I said, stuff for James Harden and advanced concepts for the entire brand. And I got to go to Germany, but I found myself just like, for multitude of reasons, some family stuff going on, but then also just like, New York's great. I could see myself visiting here a lot, but it's not Detroit for me. I was lucky enough, I had a family member that was working directly for Dan Gilbert outside of his office, and was just catching up with them. They were like, hey, if you're not liking New York, would you ever think about coming back to Detroit? And I was just like, well, what footwear brand is in Detroit for me? And she's like, well, I just showed Dan your portfolio. He and his chief of staff, they want to meet you. And before I knew it, a couple phone calls with his chief of staff led to them flying me out to a Cavs Eastern Conference Finals game. I sat down at the game, and StockX was being incubated at the time. I only kind of knew Dan as the Cavs owner, didn't really connect it with like everything that he was doing in Detroit from a real estate and philanthropic end, and then Rocket Mortgage and all these different things. And then I'm sitting there, and someone pulled out what he has as an isms book. And it was a grid of like 100 companies. And they were like, if you come sit outside of his office, you'll get to work on all of these. And somehow all of these companies, for the most part, have a tie to positively impact the city. So Dan was basically like, yeah, I don't know kind of what you exactly want to do, but I want you to come work for me. So if you work with my chief of staff, like make a job description and a job title, then let's make it happen. And I'm like, oh my God. And I fly back to New York, and I'm trying to tell you guys about it, telling my family about it. And I'm like, wait, they're like, so what's the job? And I'm just, I don't know. He told me to make a job description and a job title. So made a job description and a job title. They gave me an offer that I think stood for 24 hours. I really didn't have time to think about it. And I just said, you know what, I got to do it. If I say no to this, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And so that was 6 years ago. And I've been so lucky to then get to know the Gilbert family, even outside of Dan. And I work closely with Grant now. I've gotten to work with Jennifer, his wife, and kind of realize and just sit outside of the office of the person that's maybe had the biggest role in the city's resurgence over the last 10 years. And that's just been unbelievable. Career development or personal development doesn't even start to scratch the surface with it. And yeah, it kind of started as being Dan's creative liaison. The job description wasn't even accurate at all. Never really has been. To kind of just being the creative idea, amoeba idea guy, where stuff can come my way. And whether it's working with any of the companies here, like the Cavs, and from a rebrand capacity, to also Dan and his family looking to me to bring ideas to them as well. So like reviving an HBCU in Detroit and bringing Pencil here so that we have the only design focused HBCU in the countries here in Detroit, and it specializes with footwear and apparel. So got to work with them to bring my mentor from Portland here. And so that's been incredibly special. And that has had an impact, I guess, not only on Detroit, but Cleveland. So I get to every day come downtown in the city that to me is more special than any other city in the planet. I purchased a home with my wife, not too far from downtown, and get to know that a lot of the work that I do, not all of it anymore, but a lot of it, hopefully is positively impacting the city. And it's not just from a philanthropic end, which I like, because there's a creative lens on it. There's a problem solving lens, and there's really no bounds to it. I think that's what's special about the family and the organization and their approach to it, is if the ideas got merit, there's a positive impact kind of associated to it. Let's figure it out.
Well, and because people listening to this, some have, but many won't have sort of the front row seat that I and people close to you have had over these past 10, 15 years of your journey. You know, I can attest to the fact that you've worked very hard to create these opportunities in your life. And I think back to young Alan wearing the dusty old shoes to tryouts, and you know, your mom saying, if you make the team, we can get you a new pair of shoes. And I feel like that just makes a lot of sense to me now, that story of, I feel like that's represented for you. If you work hard, if you put in the effort, then good things can come. And I think that's been a consistent part that I've observed and had a front row seat to see in your story, which has been really special. So I'm proud of you. You're doing great work, and I can't wait to see what the next chapters hold for you. If people want to stay in touch with you and keep an eye on what those next chapters involve, what are some ways that people might be able to get in contact or stay in touch with you? Well,
Instagram would be kind of one that I would say I check periodically. So sorry if I think you and I have talked about trying to be better at communication in that sense, but Alan Largin on Instagram. Actually exciting. I'm working on incubating a creative agency here. So I'm actually going to be still working with the organization here to a certain extent, but more to come on that in the next couple of months. I think the easiest way would just be come to Detroit, just come experience, downtown and everything that the Gilbert family has been a part of, along with a lot of amazing other partners and people that never left the city. People that are here in a new way. I would say, obviously, if you want to reach out, feel free to reach out. But if you come down to the city, you'll not only maybe be able to see some of the stuff that I'm lucky enough to play a small part in, but also just have an amazing time.
Love it, man. Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your story, and thanks for your time.
Love you, dude. Thank you.
Folks, thanks as always for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And it just means a lot to know that there are people out there listening who share some of my love for these deeper conversations. If you enjoyed today's conversation, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to leave a review on the podcast platform that you're listening on, it would help a lot to grow the show. Lastly, if you'd like to continue to support this show and support meaningful conversation, I've got the Patreon linked in the show notes where you can make small financial contributions to keep the show going. All right, that's all I've got for this week, and I look forward to seeing you next week.